Welcome to the 44th Annual ODU University Literary Festival. Our theme this year, Afterwards, highlights work that addresses the storms of the past and present, and the changes wrought upon us as we turn to face the future. I'm Ken Loscom, co-director of the festival, along with my colleague, Kathy Jackson, and we'd like to thank you all for being here for today's reading by acclaimed poet, essayist, and our newest ODU Creative Writing Program faculty member, Molly McCulley Brown. Following the reading, we will have time for audience members to ask questions. So if you're in the audience right now, gather those questions unto yourself. And if you're out there watching this on live stream, please feel free to leave your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to put them to our writing. It's now my honor to welcome to the stage to introduce Molly, best-selling novelist and chair of the English department, Sherry Reynolds.
Thank you. Good to see everybody out here again today. And it is my pleasure and my great honor to introduce you to Molly McCulley Brown. She is, as Kent said, our newest full-time creative writer here at ODU. Molly moved to Norfolk this past summer and began teaching creative writing courses for us just this fall. And while we have hired her to serve as our primary nonfiction writer, she definitely started out as a poet. She was the John and Renee Grisham Fellow in Poetry at the University of Mississippi, where she received her MFA in 2017. But even before her graduation, Molly was a standout. In 2016, she won the Lexi Rudnitsky Prize for her first collection of poetry, the Virginia State Colony for Epileptic and Feeble-Minded. That collection was published by Persia Books the following year. The Virginia State Colony for Epileptic and Feeble-Minded gives voices to the lives of imagined patients and staff at a very real government-run hospital. And writing it involved a whole lot of research on the history of this place and on the American eugenics movement more generally. So it is no surprise that Molly's also an accomplished nonfiction writer, or that her second book is a collection of essays, Places I've Taken My Body. These essays were written while she was the Jeff Baskin Writers Fellow for the Oxford American, an award for writers working on a first book in nonfiction rooted in the American South, and also while she was the Amy Lowell Traveling Poetry Scholarship recipient, which took her far abroad. Places I've Taken My Body has just been released in paperback, as well as in the United Kingdom, and was named one of Kirkus's top 10 nonfiction works for 2020. Most recently, Molly's published a collection of poetry, In the Field Between Us, with her collaborator, the writer Susanna Nevison. She describes this book as a series of epistles between two physically disabled speakers that tackles the aftermath of lifelong medical intervention. Molly has published her essays and poetry in hosts of journals, including the Paris Review, the Yale Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, the New York Times, Best American Travel Writing for 2020, Tri-Quarterly Image, Tin House, Crazy Horse, and many more. Before she became a proud monarch, Molly worked at Kenyon College in Ohio, where she served as the Kenyon Review Fellow for the previous academic year. As her students already know, she is a passionate teacher who motivates and inspires those fortunate enough to enroll in her classes. From my office on the 5th floor of Baton Arts and Letters, I can hear her students as they gather in the lounge waiting for Molly to arrive and open up the conference room door where they meet. I love listening to the energy build as they enter that room. And even later when I can no longer hear the words, I can hear the sparkle and the delight in their conversations, the pauses, bursts of excitement, and Molly's contagious laughter. You don't have to spend much time with Molly to appreciate her joyful and generous presence. She's only been here for a couple of months, but she's already created warmth and community that we so needed. I feel lucky to know her, so please help me welcome the dazzling and brilliant Molly McCulley Brown.
Sherry, thank you so much for that generous introduction. Can you all hear me okay? Awesome. All right, well, in case anyone was wondering what the time is that it feels most ill-advised to have made your life and career as a memoirist and writer of deeply personal nonfiction, the answer is right before you read to a large room of your students and brand new colleagues. But I am really, really thrilled to be here. One of the things that happens if you decide that you want to make your life as a college professor as an academic is that you give up any sense that you're ever going to be able to control where you live, because you need to go where the jobs are and where the students are. And so to have found myself making a life and I hope a career in Virginia, just a few hours from where I was raised, in the geography that feels like the geography of my home and my community. It feels really, really special. I can't tell y'all how glad I am to be here, or to be in person and see so many of faces in the real audience, and then to know that there are more of you out there in the distance. Thank you for being here and for showing up. So I see many of my students in the audience. And they all know that the thing I've been demanding of them this semester again and again and again is more disclosure about what they are thinking and what they are feeling, to increase the stakes of their essays. And I've been asking them to try new things and write new things and take risks. And so it felt only fair that in that spirit, I started out by reading something newer to you guys. The book is more than a year old now, which means that the person in the book, the version of myself on the page in the book, is several years old now. And it's one of the funnier things about writing nonfiction, that by the time you put a version of yourself into the world, you aren't that person anymore in certain kinds of ways. And so I thought I'd start out by reading a newer essay, one that I've been working on since this summer. For my undergrads, this is an example of trying to write an essay in which maybe nothing particularly dramatic happens, but in which you're thinking about the relationship of your own grief to the grief of the world. It's also a test to see if I could make a joke about Jennifer Garner in an essay and have it land, so you'll have to let me know. It's called 30. I live by the water now. Not the ocean, but almost. The wide gape of the Elizabeth River just before it becomes the Atlantic a few miles out. When the wind blows, I smell warm salt and summer, and there's almost always a breeze. From my corner apartment on the 9th floor of a downtown high-rise that was once a bank, I can see the huge white hulls of docked naval ships, covered in tarps like in-progress sculpture. The cranes in the shipyard spin soundlessly in the sky, and whatever is happening out there is something I don't understand. Sometimes there are helicopters overhead. Sometimes on the street, I pass lines of boys in dress blues with bayonets. More often, paddle wheel boats filled up with tourists cut a soft, easy wake in the river, and I can almost taste the sweetness of the foam they make. These are still the first weeks in a new city, when it feels possible you might become a different person than you were before, both more disciplined and more relaxed, better about applying sunscreen and bleaching your sheets and shutting the computer down at 5:15 after a steady workday to go outside and drink a single glass of good white wine on the rooftop terrace and remember to feel lucky. I don't want to waste the shine of them, the unlikely arrival of any possibility at all after more than a year so sunk in my own small sorrow that I almost couldn't feel the way the whole world was in crisis. This isn't the first time I've had a long, depressive episode, and I know it is lifting in the slow, steady manner of a heavy curtain because my capacity for attention is returning. Because I noticed that the wind, picking up before a thunderstorm, moves the water first, ahead of even the clouds, turning the surface woolly and frenetic. Because at night, the empty office building lit up only on the top floor, level with my bedroom window, reminds me of a Hopper painting. Beautiful, lonely, acute. Because I turn on the radio and listen to the coverage as Derek Chauvin is sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison for murdering George Floyd, kneeling on his neck on a Minneapolis street until he died. And it is simultaneously heartening and nowhere near enough and entirely the wrong thing. A flawed, convenient synecdoche, mistaking the part for the whole, a reinforcement of the very same carceral system that facilitated Floyd's murder. Outside the City Art Museum, a cluster of geese refuses to clear a path for my wheelchair to pass by. Their improbable heads bob as they gurgle and honk at one another. One fans its wings out from its body, and the sudden, silly, expansive feathers makes me laugh out loud. In Israel, nearly half of the adults infected in a recent outbreak of the Delta COVID-19 variant were fully vaccinated. On the West Coast, it's 113 degrees before noon, and my parents are buying blackout curtains for my nephew's room. On the Riverwalk, I watch a little boy who smells like coconut and sunscreen even from a distance, directing his father's gaze out toward the horizon. Boat, 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 he says, moving his finger, counting. He's delighted, and so am I. What I mean is, I have the world back, and also, it's burning. In a month, I'll be 30. I'm the perfect age to have watched in theaters as Jennifer Garner did the Thriller dance in a neon dress, delivered by magic to this exact threshold, 30 and flirty and thriving. I saw her realize that the gorgeous city apartment, the successful career as a writer and editor, the industry parties and minor fame mean nothing without the man who loves her. Then I watched her return to early adolescence in plenty of time to fix her mistakes. The country's been a constant, distant war since I was 10. I grew up with the internet, but not the iPhone. I'm older than the average age at which today's American women have their first child, but not by much. And if you take into account my graduate degree, I still have 3 months to get pregnant and fall right at the median. I've been largely single for the bulk of my 20s with only insubstantial interruptions, lived in 10 different cities in the last 13 years. I'm a college professor, a writer, and editor. I've published 3 books, and I know my impulse to include this information is a kind of defensiveness. In the bookmarks folder on my web browser, there's a link for an at-home fertility test that I've flagged, but never followed through with. Have I mentioned that I use a wheelchair? That I really want to be a mother? Have I mentioned that the world is burning? My birthdays are always strange, the stretch leading into mid-August loaded with heat and absence. My identical twin died 2 days after we were born, translucent and way too early, and so every new year of my life is in lockstep with the one she didn't have. When I turn round numbers, hit milestone birthdays, I feel the simultaneity particularly strongly. I realize I've been unconsciously practicing our coming truths in our head, preparing for their arrival. I'm 30 years old. She has been dead for 30 years. I know that 30 is still young, a fact my friends, largely well past that milestone, keep reminding me. But 30 years is a long time to have been gone. Lately, I spend long stretches in front of the mirror trying to lift her face out of mine. Her particular adult gaze, a combination of our duplicate genes and the ways our lives would have diverged, our individual choices and whatever insistent, intangible force makes us self. At 18, when I pierced my right eyebrow with a tiny silver barbell, I thought briefly, absurdly, I'm sorry. Sometimes I cover the shine with my thumb when I'm searching for her. On rare occasions, I wish she could be here instead of me. I want her to meet our mother. Want isn't a strong enough word. But the truth is that half the time I'm too selfish to be willing to give up the world. And the other half, it feels so horrible and heavy that I love her too much to wish this place on her. The desire to be a parent is the strangest thing. Simultaneously deeply egocentric in the abstract, and then nearly total in the kind of, what is the word? Selflessness, generosity, service, self-abdication, maybe just love it takes to actually do it, or at least do it well. I have wonderful parents, attentive and imaginative, devoted and forgiving and generous, however old my siblings and I get. Parents who suffered and shouldered the kind of grief that crushes people, who weathered the traumatic landscape of my childhood with grace or something like it, who never ever made me feel like half or not enough. I told my father once when I was 9 or 10 that I didn't want children. I said something flippant, juvenile, and bombastic about wanting a different life, or maybe a bigger one than theirs. I don't remember that feeling at all now, and so I can't tell you where it came from. A desire for adventure or to rebel, some subconscious worry about my body's sturdiness, something I'd read. What I do remember is how hurt my father looked. "Don't ever tell your mother that," he said. By the time I was a teenager, I knew I did want children, the way you know something immutable, innate. I felt a noticeable rise in my chest as I watched a mother buckling her little girl into the airplane seat on my flight back to college in California. Noted the way she tightened her seatbelt and then the Velcro straps on her daughter's pickup truck sneakers, wrapped her hand briefly around the girl's tiny foot. And somehow, even given everything about my life, about the world, for a flash I thought, someday, like that future, that choice and its realization would be clean, inevitable, easy. My best friend asked me to be her daughter's godmother in the same phone call during which she told me she was pregnant. The question is partly a joking nod to the fact that I'm the only one of us who actually believes in some kind of God, and also I'm good at giving presents, which we've long ago agreed is a godparent's primary responsibility. But much more than that, I know it's a kind of conferral of familial responsibility. She's asking me to watch out for her girl, and also promising I'll be a steady presence in her life, allowed to know and love her closely as she grows. Because of the pandemic, I moved back to my hometown, sheltering in place just a few houses down from her. Because of the pandemic, we've spent the last months talking about the complexity of having a baby right now, with Trump in the White House and a virus raging. We're angry and afraid about the world. And also, we keep laughing about the trees canopied above us, the bluebirds building nests by the edges of the fields, the dogs with their unbothered, heavy heads in our laps. It's pastoral and absurd. We're in the mountains, in the middle of nowhere. We're as safe as we can possibly be. We're lucky. Having a baby is an act of faith in the future, I tell her. It's a hopeful act, the most hopeful act. I think how light-soaked and green this season in the Blue Ridge is, and I want her daughter to see it. Because this is the landscape of my childhood, it's the one in which I've always imagined motherhood. Rows of slight, blooming dogwoods clothespin to the hillside, citronella torches lit in a garden, fistfuls of fireflies flaring in the damp, nearing dark. And out among them, the shine of a child's shoulder in motion, freckles and unruly curls, the compact, continual thump of small feet in the clay. Then some future version of my own voice calling, "I love you, be careful, slow down." The vision ends before I see myself. When we want things, we imagine them at their most perfect, or at least their gentlest. And so, of course, it's summer and twilight and we're happy. And so, of course, I don't have a body. Of course, there's only my devotion pouring out into the dark. If there's a right way to want a child, even given the moment we're in, I think it's probably this. To look at the person you love and think, you would do a good job of this. Think, I trust you. We'll make this place at least a little better for our kid. Think, God, I want to meet the specific, miraculous stranger we'll raise. But I don't have this kind of partnership, and absent such generous, curious faith in another person, I know my own wanting is, at the very least, insufficient. As I write this, there's a wide ring of the Gulf of Mexico that's literally on fire because a gas pipeline ruptured. Also, some mornings I can barely keep my balance long enough to carry a coffee cup from the counter to my desk. I stumble, drop the cup, and there's a wide brown lake on the floor, jagged rafts of ceramic. There's an improbably long cut along the side of my palm. I don't want to imagine a child here, watching me bleed, or, God forbid, hitting the floor. Am I confused fusing the desire for a child with the longing for a long-term partner, a marriage, a life built and carried out in ordinary, shifting rhythm with another person. I ask myself this question again and again, checking to see if the answer has changed. But the rivers of desire, though they sometimes unfurl parallel to one another, even intersect, are distinct. And the way I want a child is fiercer, deeper, so blue-black and fathomless that I can't see the bottom of it. I worry more often that it's connected to Francis's death, to being a surviving twin, a lifetime marked by a sense of absence, both biological and otherworldly, this deferred responsibility for another life. Science says maternal desire is part instinct for replication anyway. And I have always known there ought to be another person with my genome here. Haven't I just admitted how long I spend looking for someone else's face carved out of my own? Do I want to have a child as if it would set something right? I weighed more than Frances when we were born. She was the one deprived of amniotic fluid, and so I am the one who got the world, in all its terror and glory, sadness and shining from shook foil. I'm the one who got live oaks and rug burn and cider donuts, libraries and the soft, unthinkable fuzz of lands, the widening hole in the ozone layer, clinical depression, the wind off the water, the heat of a loved one's face buried in your hair. Do I want to have a child as an apology, a substitute? Do I just want to give someone the world? Is it right to give someone a world that looks like this? My child wouldn't be Frances, of course, not a second chance of her precise life and not a copy of my genes, but a combining, no matter how I went about the making. They'd be someone else, somebody new, exact, at least a little inexplicable. I'd like the chance to know them. When my goddaughter is born at the end of July, I love her with an instant totality that surprises me a little. It's partly a loud echo of my love for her mother, but something else too, crystalline, magnetic, and steady. She's 2 days old the first time I hold her, milky and improbable, with a full head of hair. I feel my face break open when I smile at her. Watching my friend be a mother is also a joy I hadn't fully accounted for. The way she expands to make room for this new facet of herself, how it draws on her nearly bottomless capacity for tenderness, but also on her necessary edge, her pragmatism, the steadfastness of her humor. I admire her anew. It's incredible to watch someone you love fall in love. And also, I know that what I am seeing is the top of an iceberg, the edge of something that goes on for miles underneath the water. Beautiful, intricate, and sometimes jagged, mostly invisible to me. Though I'm working a flexible schedule right down the road, there's a real limit to how much I can do to help. I can't walk the baby to the changing table or stand up steady long enough to change her diaper. I can't carry her up the stairs to her nursery on the second floor, which I've still never seen, or lean down to lift her safely from her crib. I can't help but feel I am failing the people I love. When her mother and I met, our deep and easy friendship was propelled in part by our shared history. I'd never been close to another writer with a disability before, and there was pleasure, safety, and recognition in how fluently we spoke the same language of medical trauma, continual reconfigurations, navigating visibility, intimacy, chronic pain. Our bodies and mobility have never been perfect parallels, and we've always held space for the things we can't know about one another's experiences, the ways our lives diverge. But our kinship is steady and profound. When I watch her swing her daughter up off the floor or carry her up the stairs, the gulf between our bodies is a question of what's possible. I say I miss you too often and ask to hold the baby again. Women in wheelchairs have children all the time. I keep a folder of links to chair height changing tables, baby wraps made to be worn while sitting down, a Norwegian stroller designed to attach to a manual wheelchair. I know that in my own house, my child would have a room on the ground floor, a crib I could reach. I know I have so many kinds of privilege working to my advantage. An education, an academics work schedule, and a steady salary with opportunities for growth. A supportive, extended family. I know, despite the pang I feel when I can't chase my nephew out into the yard the way he asks, that my child would grow up understanding why I couldn't push her on the swing at the gravel playground or pick her up at the kitchen counter, why I moved so differently from her classmates' parents. And I know, too, am I allowed to say this? That I'd be a good mother, loving, inventive, and present. I have an endless capacity for nonsense languages and imagined stories and tricking children into bedtime routines, for bad school plays and gossip and broken hearts. But mostly, I know there's only so much you can control. I'm familiar with chance, with mess, with suffering, with what's made in the aftermath. I want a child, not a replica, not company, not a fantasy or fix. I know it precisely because I can't quite explain it or reconcile the way the ache lives both in and alongside my body, how it persists even in stretches when I have the least faith in the world and the clumsy, destructive way we live inside it. I also know I couldn't parent on my own, that would be untenable and unforgivable. There's too much I couldn't manage day to day, and a child deserves more than my exhaustion, my mounting pain, one sweep of depression after another because I'm in over my head. I've tried to imagine it before, having a baby by myself, but every version of that future ends with my own mother, weary and spent at 75, doing too much childcare, pouring herself out until there isn't more to give. It ends in an echo of the man at the Ohio Animal Shelter who, when I inquired about adopting a dog, replied with no malice, "I just don't think you can take care of her alone." It ends beyond my means, beyond my body's limits. With a son or a daughter, I failed. Whatever country, whatever planet our children inherit, they will need to know they're loved. They'll need someone with the energy to teach them how to chase joy and permit sorrow, how to retain hope if, for a time, the water rises or the dark descends. They'll need to learn to be of service, to level their resources for the common good, and to understand that service as an inevitability, a calling, and a gift. Our children will need to invent solutions for the damage we've done. They'll need to be raised to attend to fireflies and the birds who build nests on the ledges of city skyscrapers and the dignity of every person on the street below. To be attuned to mystery and science and the way a real laugh sounds. It takes steadiness to raise a person like that. I couldn't do it alone. And right now, at least in that sense, I am. But 30 is an arbitrary threshold, whatever Jennifer Garner in 13 Going on 30 thinks. I'll wake up on the 14th of August, and my body will still be my body. And my sister will have been dead for 30 years, and I'll still miss her with an urgency that makes no sense. The world will still be burning. I will still want a child. It will still be crucial that I be of service. The boats will still cut their wakes in the water. I'll be 30, and time will be passing, but nothing will be over yet. Before that, though, my goddaughter will turn 1. I assemble a slightly indulgent package of gifts to send because it's my job, and the process delights me. Exquisitely illustrated picture books, animals with adorable faces. I write her a birthday card she's too young to read, but which her mother will save. On a video call, I turn my camera around so she can see the river where I'm sitting, the cranes and the boats and the blue. I live by the water now. Whatever is coming is something I don't yet understand. Thank you. It's only 4:30, so I think I'll read just very briefly from this book. I thought really hard about whether there was something cheerfuler I could choose to read after that. There's just not, guys. It's sad. I'm a funny person. All my work is very sad. This is just the universe that we live in. But I thought that I would read a little bit from the essay Muscle Memory that begins the book. Because this question of memory and of how we recall things is something I've been thinking about a lot. So I'll read just a few pages from the beginning of this essay, and if my editor is out there listening, I'm doing this because it's good promotion for the book. People will maybe buy it. All right, muscle memory. For the last 6 months or so, whenever I've moved suddenly, stood up out of a chair, bent down to get my laundry from the machine, sneezed too hard in line at the convenience store up the block from my apartment, my back has spasmed, as if someone's making a quick, hard fist around my spine and squeezing. At first, it was just a twinge, enough to startle me. These days, it knocks me off balance if I don't brace for it first. And so I stretch more, and I stand and count to 3 before I step, or carry my coffee cup away from the table, or crouch down to put the dishes in the cabinet. Oh, I write a lot about coffee, you guys. I just am realizing that. I turn off the fan in the bedroom while I sleep, though it's May in Mississippi and already 80 degrees. Better to wake up sweating than knotted and tremoring from some little chill. They're tiny, these adaptations. I suspect it took me months to notice I was making them. I couldn't even tell you what I used to do with the small space the spasms fill. This version of my life erases the last one like a tape someone's recorded over. Already, my memories begin reworking themselves to admit the spasm's brief delay. 2 seconds tacked onto the end of everything, a touch more hurt. I haven't been to see a doctor because the change has so far been manageable, because another dose of ibuprofen, a little less energy, a slightly stronger ache to cope with isn't gonna hurt me, really. I haven't been to see a doctor because I'm finishing graduate school and caught in the bureaucracy of going. No permanent address, shifting health insurance, too much in flux, and way too much to do. Grad students, go to the doctor, it's important. I haven't seen a doctor because I haven't had a steady orthopedist since the pediatric one I saw until I was 18. They treat cerebral palsy aggressively when you're young, your brain and body at the height of their plasticity. There's money to be spent on research and the promise of real progress to be made. They split your nerves, lengthen your tendons, splint your legs, and map your changing gait with digital sensors that form points of light on the computer screen to indicate your muscles and your joints. This little constellation, self, staggers the same blank orbit each year, getting taller. And then your body and brain have been reshaped as radically as medicine will currently allow, and you're just who you are. And there are the ensuing years to manage on your own. I haven't seen a doctor because my body has been mostly this version of itself for more than a decade now, and they've been mostly good years. I know the map of who I am and how I move by instinct, like home. I haven't seen a doctor because they'll want to alter something major, or they'll tell me that there's nothing to be done, that this is just my body's slow erosion asserting itself beyond ignoring, and either way, there'll be a new geography to reckon with. I haven't seen a doctor because I am afraid. I haven't seen a doctor because there's too much to be said for feeling familiar to yourself. This is all the truth. Another truth. Before I knew this body, I knew another, nimbler one. My very first body, the one untouched by major surgical intervention, exists only before my memory. For all intents and purposes, I wake into the world at the moment of its refashioning. My first clear recollection at 4 years old. Somebody's hand hovering over my face, the weird cage of the gas mask, a dense, false butterscotch mingled with the drug. No memory, of course, of what they did while I was under. They give you something to induce forgetting. But the body I woke up with, I know it served me well for years. I know the surgeons clipped select nerves in my spinal cord and thereby cut off at the pass the bulk of my brain's bad commands to my muscles to contract beyond functionality or comfort. I know enough to know that I was born again, then in a looser shape. The first one I recognized as mine. And it's in that body that I spent my childhood. I moved stutteringly around my grade school classrooms. I wore opaque plastic leg braces that stopped at my calves and sneakers 2 sizes too big for my real feet that made me look like a girl playing dress up as a circus clown. I never played tag or kickball, but I could slowly climb the stairs to the splintering wooden castle and go down the slide. I could haul myself up to the monkey bars and swing along them just long enough to fall and split my lip like children do. The cut there bled a bright and normal red that made my mother woozy while they stitched it up. There isn't any scar. And once I could hop. I remember because when I finally learned in the basement of the Baptist hospital, straining to reach a tennis ball the physical therapist held on a stick above my head, in retrospect, this sounds very cruel. I can't believe they did this. My father brought an ice cream cake from the Dairy Queen, all chemical, soft serve, sweet, and we had a little party in the brightness of our farmhouse kitchen. I did it on command, 2 inches maybe off the ground. I know it happened, but that little space below my feet feels like a fiction now, held up against the relentless fact of gravity. My family took a trip to Europe when I was 9 years old. My parents, on sabbatical from college teaching jobs, swapped houses with a Spanish novelist and his wife. And for months, we walked on the beaches of the Mediterranean and through the rocky outcrops to the north where Spain borders France. I remember flashes of these months with wild specificity. The garden of blooming cacti outside our little terracotta villa, playing rummy with my sister in the heat on the flat roof while someone blared a bizarre pop song about a cockroach from the radio next door. I can see the winding maze of nighttime street markets full of Pokemon knockoffs and hand-painted bowls, humming with twinkle lights and half-drunk bodies. The huge, cool steps of all the old churches turned into hotels, the wooden roller coaster edging out toward the cliff face, that strange, spindly castle that wound up and up and up until you climb the stairs and pass right through the clouds and to the other side. In pictures, I'm standing at the top of the castle landing, in the shadow of the cathedral doors, on the white wash of some uninterrupted beach. I walked and climbed through cities centuries too old for elevators and across streets paved in big, uneven cobblestones. I threaded myself through a little monastery door and up a flight of improvised stone stairs into a walled garden, wrapped up in green. I can't remember getting there, not crossing the hill to the church grounds, not standing waiting for the door to give, not moving through the airy halls or up the stairs. If I try to picture it now, I can only envision myself up to the threshold. My memory of myself pauses and waits, but there isn't enough left of that balance or energy, even for the purposes of recollection. I can imagine myself walking up through the monastery only in the same sense I can imagine that I flew. You never recall what you do by instinct, and while my parents paused at every turn to say, "Remember this," they meant the huge embroidered tapestries, the deep ring of the chapel bell, the way the air smelled hot, but also dense with moss that wasn't there. No one knew enough to warn me that the body I had then would go to myth in my mind much faster than any of the rest of it. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. Thank you so much. How about another round of applause for
Yeah, thanks, Helena.
Hi.
Hello.
That was really good. I really liked that. It was so good.
Thanks.
So my question actually comes like, I want to know about your schedule of writing. Like, when do you write? Do you write in the morning? Do you write every day?
So that's funny, and when I answer these kinds of questions, I always want to be the kind of writer who can be like, yes, it's very important to be disciplined and keep a schedule and write every day, but that would be a lie, and I try not to lie to my students. The truth is that my writing schedule really depends on the schedule for the rest of my life. I have this other crazy job where I teach you people to do things, and sometimes that is taking up the most space in my life, and so there are weeks where I don't write very much. But I will say that I feel better on the days that I make even just 10 minutes to go to the desk. And I try to start there in the morning before the emails take over. And I try to end my day by reading. And actually, I firmly believe, those of you who listened in on Gabrielle Calvacaresi's remarkable reading last night, heard them say that there are months they sometimes go without writing. And I think that that is the case for lots of writers, but I do firmly believe that the best thing you can do for yourself as an artist is to read every day, regardless of whether you're writing, whether you're feeling stuck, whether you're feeling excited, whether you have time to attend to the project you want to or not. If you can make just a little bit of time for a book every day, I think we're all better for it.
Thank you. Hey, Professor.
Hi, Bella.
I wanted to ask, what's the best advice you could give to a young writer? Because you've accomplished so much. I think you've accomplished a lot as a writer at a young age. I think that takes a lot as a writer of everything that you've done. And I think maybe another way to phrase this question is, what was something you just kept telling yourself throughout this whole process to get to where you are now?
So I'm going to steal again from Gabby's wonderful talk last night, and they talked about the idea that the most important thing you can do as you develop as a writer is figure out your gate. What's the door you have to walk through? And the way that I think about that is, what's the thing you have to say or the question you have to ask? And for me, the thing that made it possible to keep going as a writer, or to feel like I believed in something even when it didn't feel like it was getting a lot of external validation from the world, or like I wanted to teach myself how to do something that I didn't know how to do, was that I really wanted to write into what I felt like was a kind of silence, which was I wanted to write about my life as a woman with a disability in a way that felt nuanced and complicated, and like it would one day keep somebody company, in a way that I had wished, and many times in my youth that I have been kept company. And I think figuring out who is the reader I want to keep company, and who are the writers I want to keep company with, is a really motivating thing to do, because then it doesn't matter in some ways, if everything is immediately leading to accolades or if you're tired, because the thing you have out there in the world is this notion that one day your work is going to keep somebody company, which I think really is the most important thing that we can do as writers.
Thank you. That's really well put.
Hi, Professor. I'm unfamiliar with your work, but I will be taking your class next semester, so I'm not saying this is sucked for a grade, but I do intend to familiarize myself soon.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you.
So from that reading and from what I've heard, you do an excellent job of separating like the self from the body.
Yeah.
My question is, did that come naturally to you, or was there a struggle? And where does that insight come from, and how is that affected? How did you come to that, and how has that affected your work?
Yeah, that's such a good and nuanced and important question. And I think I have a really, still a really evolving relationship to that question of what is the relationship between the body and the self, right? And to what extent are those things divisible? To what extent are they interconnected? And what do they have to do with one another? The title of this book is Places I've Taken My Body, and I had a really long conversation with my editor about whether if we called it Places I've Taken My Body, it was going to seem like I was carrying a corpse around places. But in some ways, it felt really important to me to put that division in the title because navigating that relationship feels like it's the thing sort of at the center of a lot of my work. And I think the thing I have come to believe is that we're both separate from our bodies and also not separate from our bodies, and that is one of the most infuriating and also remarkable and exciting facts about being a person. And I will also say it's one of the most fertile facts for essays, right? I think so many of my favorite essays in the world are made in the complicated space where contradictory things are true, right? Or where something frustrating is true, or where you are changing, even over the course of working on a piece, your relationship to a question or an idea as a writer because you don't know exactly where you land, right? The root of the word essay is the French word essayer, which means to try. And I love the idea of the essay as an attempt, a kind of working out, right? And so I would say that question of to what extent are we divisible from our bodies and what do we do with the sort of difficult yoke between the body and the soul is the animating question of my work in lots of ways.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Tope.
I really love your reading. I was going to ask, you started out as a poet and then transitioned to nonfiction, even though you still do write poetry. And I was wondering in what ways does poetry still show up in your nonfiction, and if you feel the need to separate them or incorporate certain details that are exclusive to those forms, and in what ways do they show up in your work?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's my belief that poets are the best writers of all the writers because the skills, some clapping in the back, because the skills that you develop as a poet, which is attention to language itself, right, and to the body of language and the material of language on the page, those are useful in every genre. Right? The musicality of the sentence, the pacing of a sentence, what happens when you play with a break, with a pause. Those are poet skills, right? And they're very much, I would say, alive in my prose. And also alive in my prose, as you guys could probably notice, just from the reading I did, is a real attachment to repetition and refrain, and what happens when we repeat something, right? And we've talked even in our nonfiction class, Tope, about the ways that when writers repeat something, the thing that is remarkable that happens is that repetition is a little different every time, even if it's exactly the same. An idea transforms, a word transforms, your relationship as a reader to that word transforms, right? And so those things are as alive, I would say, in my prose as they are in my poems. The difference has always felt to me that writing a poem is like building a whole, it's like making a world with its own laws and its own gravity and its own logic. And then your job is to teach the reader how does that world work, right? And then writing an essay is like walking around in the world that already exists and trying to chart a path through it and figure out your way through it. And I would say that usually I have an idea, or more often than not, I have a question that seems like it's going to lend itself to one of those activities more strongly. Either it feels like a question that wants me to build a world around it, or it's a question that feels like it wants me to figure out how to chart a path through the one that exists. And that's usually sort of how I decide which way I'm going to go. Although sometimes I'm wrong, and I think it's a world-making question, and it's actually an exploring one, and it becomes an essay, and vice versa. But I really, I think that working in multiple genres is a thing that it makes every writer a better writer, regardless of whether they go on to publish or to think of themselves as occupying another genre. We're all better and more interesting when we learn to do new things. Yeah.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Laurel.
So you mentioned earlier that you read every day. This is more a selfish inquiry to expand my book list. But what is one piece of literature that has either impacted your writing or influenced your writing that you would recommend to other memoir nonfiction
poetry writers?
So right now in my graduate class, we're reading Carmen Marie Machado's In the Dream House, which is a remarkable memoir in vignettes and in fragments. And as somebody who thinks about poetry and nonfiction, I'm so interested in the relationship between the fragment and the whole. And that book is an absolute stunner in thinking about those things. I also, if you're looking for a book that you can kind of pick up and put down and that might float with you through days that are busy and called upon to be filled with other things, I have recently been reminded how much I love Justin Torres's little novella We the Animals, which is an autobiographical. The publishers call it a novel. It's also in vignettes. It could be a poem, it could be a memoir, it could be a novel, it could be so many things. But it's a sort of truly extraordinary book, and I think about it all the time, and I think everyone should read it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, we've got time for one more.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Emma.
So as nonfiction writers, we bear a lot of ourselves on the page, but there's a certain safety in that, I think. There's that layer of protection. When it comes to reading your nonfiction aloud, what was the process of becoming comfortable speaking what you previously might not even have had the bravery to put on paper?
Yeah. That's a good question, Emma. And I think for me, a helpful thing is that I almost always care more about making good art than I do about seeming like a perfect or particularly wonderful person. And we've talked a lot in our nonfiction class about how you hate nobody more in nonfiction than a person who is always the hero of their own story, right? Who is always perfect and always saving the day and always making the good decisions. And so sometimes I think to myself, it's fine, you're gonna seem like a deeply flawed or imperfect or frustrating or angry or sad or whatever person on the page, but it's gonna be more interesting for the essay, and so that's fine. So that is, I'm being a little facetious, but not actually really. Remembering that the thing I'm doing is in service of the art that I'm making is really, really helpful. And then also thinking about the fact that one of the things that we do as nonfiction writers, and I've talked about this with all of my students, is we actually exert a measure of control, right? Because we are deciding the questions that we're going to ask, the way that we're putting ourselves on the page. And in fact, that's much more control than we have in real life most of the time when we're walking around and people are just making assumptions about us all the time and responding to us and catching us at the end of a really terrible day where we haven't brushed our hair and look unfortunate. And so remembering that actually putting the version of myself on the page or a question on the page or a feeling or a frailty on the page is a way of claiming a thing that frightens me. And again, of keeping company, someone who might feel themselves as flawed or frail or uncertain in the same way, always makes it feel worth it to sort of get over that hump. And then also, on most stages, you can only kind of see the people that are in front of you, and so you can mostly just pretend you're reading to a sea of plain faces, and that's also helpful. Thanks, Emma.
Wow. Thank you, Molly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Whoops. Oh, I gotta be in the front. Sorry. I have it in my mark. Well, thank you again, Molly. Thank you, Sherry, for the beautiful introduction. Thank you to Woody and the University Theater staff. And I'd like to extend a very special thanks to our graduate program assistant, Emma Comery, without whom this festival would not be possible. Would you all please give Emma a round? The University Bookstore is here with Molly's books for you to purchase and to have signed. And please join us again at 7 p.m. for a reading by Dontiel W. Moniz. And for the full schedule, please see the ODU Literary Festival website. See you all next time.